Welcome to Inflection Point Podcast, where we cultivate change from the inside out as we ponder the Cairo question. Will Cairo have to protest in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born? We stand on the belief that dismantling racism goes beyond laws and legislation or politics and economics. Here, anti-racism activation is presented as an inside job where personal transformation and accountability impact social change. So take a seat at the anti-racism activation table with Inflection Point Podcast.
Well, hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the newest episode of Inflection Point Podcast, where we are dedicated to the art of listening in authentic conversation. We challenge our audience to listen actively and intentionally for the purpose of self-awareness, understanding, and ultimately personal transformation. So I'm your host, Anita Russell, and here is a quick hello from Mavis and Gail.
Hi, I'm Mavis Bauman. Thanks for listening tonight.
Hi, I'm Gail Hunter, and thanks for coming and listening to us tonight.
Excellent, excellent. So if you have been following us, you know that we've been doing a series. And the overall topic of the series is generational leaders, historical and contemporary. And the overarching question that we've been kind of pondering is, how does the Ghanaian principle of Sankofa empower generational leadership? So the official title of our series is the Sankofa Generational Leadership Continuum. So, let me tell you a little bit about what that is. The Sankofa Leadership Continuum, I see it as a through line that runs from historical leaders of the past to contemporary leaders of the present to those who will emerge as future leaders. And so it kind of melds together historical and contemporary reality. This through line inspires activism, art, literature, ethnography, and research to fuel transformation. So the question that we're pondering today is, how do we apply generational leadership as a grassroots resistance strategy that serves to disrupt systemic and institutional racism? So the whole entire reason that Inflection Point Podcast even exists is that we have decided that we wanted to be a part of that grassroots resistance strategy for the purpose of disrupting systemic and institutional racism, which means we've decided to be a part of a much larger movement than just the three of us. So what I'd like to do is start off by sharing these 5 principles of generational leadership, just to kind of give that phrase a little bit more definition and how does it apply to the work that we actually do. And so the first principle is that generational leaders ask themselves, how many generations will be able to build upon my current vision and foundation? In other words, the work that I am doing today, the work that Mavis, Gail, and I are doing together on Inflection Point Podcast, how will future individuals be able to build upon what we are doing currently? That's a really profound question, because it really forces people to kind of not just look at themselves within the context of what they're doing in the moment, but it's really that a generational leader will build a foundation on a clear, strong why, with values that can be sustained. So when you kind of think about that and relate it to, for example, Inflection Point Podcast, we have some very strong reasons why we do the work that we do. And if you've been following us, you know that one of those reasons is related to a little 3-year-old boy by the name of Cairo. And we introduced, when we first got started with the podcast, we introduced the concept of the Cairo question. And it came shortly after the murder of George Floyd. And the Cairo question is, will Cairo have to protest in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born. And so the answer to that question is related to what generational leaders are going to do today. And so the second principle of generational leadership is making intentional decisions. That is knowing that you may not reap the benefits today because the benefits may come much later in life. So when I think about the Cairo question, the benefit of the work that we're doing may not show up until he's, 15 years old or something. But the point being, we are continuing to make these intentional decisions, to do this intentional action to produce benefits that can play out for someone who is a 3-year-old today. And then the third principle is investing proactively into the next generation. So generational leaders proactively invest vision and values into others, and subsequently their impact will continue long after they are gone. So that's the whole entire purpose of kind of looking at leadership again through that continuum lens. So it's not something that you're just doing within the context of the contemporary times that you're living in right now. The whole entire point of a generational leader is to impact the next generation, which will then impact the generation to follow. And so you're producing this activity, you're producing these changes, you're producing transformation that can make a difference for generations to come. And then the fourth one is lead the next generation more like a parent than a boss. So that might sound a little like, what do you mean by that kind of thing? But the point being that an effective generational leader will lead in the present, thinking about the future. And isn't that exactly what parents do? We lead in the present on a daily basis, raising up our children and thinking about that within the context of what they are going to do, what they will be, who they will be as they grow older and older and older. So it's kind of taking on this parental kind of view, if you will. And then finally, the fifth principle is being intentional about your legacy, which requires selfless courage to know our own morality, to know our own mortality, I should say, that we're not going to be around forever. But the work that we do today to invest in others, to dream beyond our current reality, and to work towards a harvest that we may never, ever see. But isn't that the overall benefit of being a generational leader? So the point isn't that you're going to realize whatever that vision or that strategy is today, because you're doing it intentionally for what you can bring about in the future, for future generations, and so on, and so on, and so on. And that kind of brings me full circle back to the whole idea of this Sankofa Leadership Continuum, because it starts in the past, and then the past informing the future, and then the past informing the present, and then the present informing the future. And so it's this continuum of past, present, and future. And we're just looking at all of that from a leadership perspective. So having said all of that, Mavis and Gail, comments, feelings, whatever.
Well, I think it's our responsibility to ourselves and to everyone to be that type of a leader in whatever walk of life that is, whatever, and just in interactions with every human being, right? To pass on that ability to see the other, and truth and respect and ability to just be, so that we can pass it on to our children, our grandchildren, and leave that imprint that that's really what we are all here for. We're not here to be in competition. We're here to be able to collaborate, to be together. And so that is about generational leadership, right? That passes itself on down, just in even those aspects, not just in what we're going to be talking about this evening. So there's so many ways that we can do this and step into that.
Absolutely. And I always love it when you use the word imprint, because that's exactly what we are doing. The
Yes.
things that we're doing today are leaving that imprint for people such as Cairo, or even Cairo's children, and all of that. And so it does become this continuum, this legacy, which is exactly what our conversation is built on. Mavis?
Yeah, it makes me think of my work in Rwanda, because when I started it, I didn't have this sort of background, but I had made up my mind early on that I was okay to do the work for the genocide survivors without seeing the harvest. And I feel like I adopted that principle because I didn't want to be held to bottom line business results today. I knew I wanted to invest in these people in more of a future way, more of a spiritual way, and not, like I say, a bottom line dollar way. And it has just been such a gorgeous experience. It's lovely to think that you have the opportunity to impress lives that will impress other lives and so on. So it's validating, girl, it's validating.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And since you brought up Rwanda, can you share with our audience a little bit about the NGO that you started working with that had this whole entire emphasis on having that generational impact?
Right, right. I visited Rwanda and connected with a Rwandan woman there who has an organization called Generations Impact. And her goal was to make sure that the children of Rwanda never had to endure another massacre or another genocide. And I connected with her because I wanted to be able to do something for the current victims. And we just kind of brought our ideas together. And now we have an organization called Seed a Better Life, with the idea that anyone's life can be made better, no matter who you are, through education, through food in your belly, through a peaceful place to sleep. And so that's the kind of simple work we've been doing. And we're hearing from our kids that have grown up just how much it meant to them. So it's just been so much fun, so gratifying.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, and having had the fortune of being able to go on one of those trips to Rwanda with you. And so I can feel all of that passion that you have. I had the opportunity to kind of experience the passion on the ground in Rwanda, and how generationally we can make a difference. It's just all about making those decisions, making the right kinds of choices, meeting people where they are.
Yes.
Right. I think that was probably a very valuable piece of the work that you did in Rwanda, was just knowing how to meet people where they are.
And I was just willing, I think, was kind of the biggest thing. What do you need? I didn't have a prescription for them. I wanted to know what they needed. So yeah, it was great fun to go and, together to witness these wonderful young people.
Absolutely.
Their lives,
Absolutely.
right? Yeah.
So we're going to switch our conversation up a little bit. One of the things that I mentioned earlier when I was describing the Sankofa Leadership Continuum being this through line, and it's this whole idea of inspiring, like from a historical perspective, inspiring activism and art and literature and ethnography and all of these different things that have happened over the course of multiple generations. And so one of the things that we've been doing throughout this series is just picking individuals within a particular historical context and really talking about the work that they did. And oftentimes that work was revolutionary, if you will, within the context of the time period that they may have been living in. But the sum total of it all is that it all added to resistance. And that's what I said, as I mentioned earlier, that a lot of this, that's what it's about. It's this grassroots movement of resistance to break the stronghold of racism in our country. So we're gonna talk about two of those individuals this evening. So I'm gonna pass the baton to Gail, And she's going to share with us about this incredible human being who kind of danced across borders all over the world.
And he did. His name is Frankie Manning. He was born in 1914. And dancing is, I've always loved dancing. And in my early 60s, I decided to learn how to do swing dancing and Lindy Hop dancing. And some people may think that was crazy, but I found it to be incredible and I loved it. And it's great exercise, but it also is a great way of being social with people and being connected to other people. And didn't matter what race they were, it didn't matter what religion, whatever, we were just all there. Because I look at dance and music and as a universal language. And there are other certainly universal languages too, but I think music and dance clearly are two of them. So Frankie was born in Jacksonville, Florida in 1914, and his mother, when he was only 3 years old, moved him and her up to New York City, up to Harlem. And when all that was going on with the great northward migration of Southern Black people, and they did settle in Harlem. So he began dancing as a child, and his mother actually was a dancer too. And Manning's mother sent him to spend summers with his father and aunt and grandmother back in South Carolina on their farm. And he would talk about how on the weekends, on Saturdays, that people would come from all over and they play music on the front porch, and they with harmonicas and a washtub bass, and they'd sing and they'd dance. And so he began to get hooked into the music and the dance. In 1929, one day on his way to Sunday school, he experienced a cultural epiphany, he said, on 7th Avenue, outside the Alhambra Ballroom, when he discovered that he could take part in a youth dance there instead of going to Sunday school. And so he started taking lessons, and his mother thought that he was too stiff. And if you ever get a chance, YouTube Frankie Manning, and you will see he is anything but stiff. He was an incredible acrobatic and athletic person. So he continued to practice. In 27, he attended the Renaissance Ballroom and Casino, and he watched his mother do the foxtrot and waltz from the balcony. And when he got a little bit older, he started to go to what was called the Savoy Ballroom, which was the only integrated ballroom in New York. He started attending evening classes for older teens at the ballroom. And when he was older, and he was going more to the Savoy Ballroom in the 30s, he eventually became a dancer in the elite and prestigious Cat's Corner, which is a corner of the dance floor where impromptu exhibitions and competitions took place. During a dance contest, he met his partner, Free Washington, and they performed the very first aerial in a swing dance competition. He went on to, I think it was Herbert White, organized a group of them called the Savoy Ballroom Lindy Hop Dancers into a professional performance group, and they eventually were named the Whitey's Lindy Hoppers. But Manny created the troupe's first ensemble Lindy Hop routines and functioned as the group's de facto choreographer, even though he didn't have the title for it. So he traveled all over the country, and then he went internationally. He traveled through France and Ireland, Britain. He went to New Zealand and Australia and Asia. But when the war came, obviously they all quit the dancing, and he was in the service in the army in New Guinea and the Philippines and Japan during World War II. And afterwards, he led a 4-person dance called the Congaroos, and they went and toured England and South America. They appeared in a movie called Killer Diller, which I'm not sure I remember, but in 1948. And but by 1950s, they finally kind of abandoned the dance because it was dying out. And then he took a job in the post office, and he worked there for 35 years, where I believe his really contribution to generational leadership comes in was after 32 years of service, he embarked on a very hyperactive retirement. He returned to his full attention to the Lindy, which he had begun experiencing a revival. And in 1986, 2 dancers found where he was living, contacted him and asked him to teach them the Lindy Hop. At first he declined, but then he finally agreed to meet with him. And he was very skeptical. He said, as a much younger generation would really be interested in swing or Lindy. But Mitchell and Stevens returned to California and helped to spread Lindy Hop to the West Coast and other areas of the United States. And the swing revival began. He actually then started traveling around the country and even international, teaching Lindy Hop, even until he was 94 years of age. So once that swing dance and Lindy Hop revival took hold during the 80s, he, as I said, was very devoted to different people. He was he choreographed the Broadway musical Black and Blue, for which he received a 1989 Tony Award in 2000. And he was awarded a National Endowment for the Arts, National Heritage Fellowship. He wrote with Cynthia Millman his own autobiography, Frankie Manning, Ambassador of Lindy Hop, which was published in 2007. And has many stories about his experiences before the war, and then obviously since before he died. He also trained Denzel Washington for a Lindy scene in Spike Lee's film Malcolm X, in which Mr. Manning also appeared. And the quote is, "We were just trying to keep up with him," Mr. Washington recalled, because even at that age, he still had that much energy. He also had other awards, National Heritage Fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts in 2000. And he and Miss Miller were the only dancers to be included in Ken Burns' PBS documentary series, Jazz. His marriage to Gloria Holloway ended in divorce. And in addition to his current companion before he died, he also has a son named Chaz, who also took up the Lindy Hop with him and went along teaching with him when he returned to that field in his 80s and 90s. And he has another son, I believe a daughter, and 7 grandchildren and 9 great-grandchildren. And in 1990, his 80th birthday, 1994, he was commemorated with a week-long celebration in New York City. And it was a sold-out party at New York's Roseland Ballroom. What he would do is he would have, on every year of his birthday, from that point on, he had a big celebration. What Lindy Hop people and swing dancing do is every year, in many cities across the world and internationally, they do what's called a Lindy Hop dance. And people from all over the place come. Pittsburgh has one, and there are many other cities across the country that also do. And it's a way of celebrating him and also celebrating themselves and the love of dance that they all have. Before his death, when he was planning his 95th birthday celebration in 2009, he died right before that time. They still went ahead and continued the celebration to honor him and to credit him with all that he had taught and all that he had done. And even though he had 2 hip replacements that slowed him down, he still was active part of planning that 95th birthday celebration. So I would like to just honor him for what he's done. If you ever get a chance, as I said, please YouTube him, and and you will be amazed at how he moves. But what he did for generations was just incredible. I mean, he really literally did create that leadership role, right? Mm-hmm. And not just taught people how to enjoy and appreciate music and dance, but he created this way of it being so much fun, and that anybody can do this at whatever age. There are people that were 18 and people that were 80 at these dances, and you don't even have to have a partner to go. They have dances all over the city where we are, and many cities across the United States also have them. And it's fun, it's great exercise, and it's a great way to connect to people of all ages. And color is not an issue there, because you go from one person to the next to dance, and it's just incredible. And the fact that he came back at that point in his life to teach, I think is pretty amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, that is amazing. And I love the fact. Now, what year was he born again?
1914.
So we have somebody that was born in 1914, and then much later on, many decades later, when Spike Lee is doing his work, right? He touched Spike Lee in doing the Malcolm X film, which was a very important film in the time period in which it was released. That was a really, really important film. And I remember so vividly that dancing.
Yes, that was him.
Ballroom, and they were just dancing all over the place.
That's Lindy Hop. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of interesting. One of the other things that I had read was one of the things that we know often happens when it comes to Black art and literature, culture, you know, dance, music, and all of that is how it sometimes can be appropriated or misappropriated.
Yes.
And I had read somewhere where the word jitterbug was white people's sort of reinventing or appropriating
Lindy Hop, right.
real Lindy Hop.
Yes, it was.
So I just think that's kind of interesting when you really start peeling back all of these different layers and all of these different artists and all of that, and how that spilled over into the greater culture, but it didn't spill over into the greater culture in terms of embracing the culture that it was spilling over from, essentially the Black culture.
Interesting. The young couple that actually found him and reconnected with him, it was white, and they were the ones that actually wanted to find him. They didn't want somebody that was just doing jitterbug. They wanted to find somebody that could teach them Lindy Hop and to go back to the origins of it. And who better but Frankie Manning? Yeah.
Exactly. And that is just such a wonderful example of generational leadership, right? So they had to reach back into the past to find this gentleman that was like the top person in that time period to do what he was doing, and which brings him back into you know, contemporary times. Now he's going on tour, sort of reliving some of the stuff that he had done in the past. So I see that as a very powerful example of what we're talking about in terms of this generational leadership and how it just spills over from the past to the present and hopefully will flow into the future. So we have about 3 minutes left before we go on break. So Mavis, any comments from you about?
I do have a couple of comments. I can just see people of all colors on the dance floor.
Yes.
And that makes me so happy. So it can be done.
Yes.
Because everybody dances. Even a baby hears music.
That's
and
right.
starts to move.
They start moving. That's right.
They start moving. And what a bridge, you know, and it's just funny that someone saw fit to rename it. Why? Why? You know, like you said, that part of it didn't flow over in, you know,
no, it didn't.
Expropriation or whatever it's called. Yeah.
And it's amazing. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I will definitely YouTube him. And if I see you soon, Gail, I want you to teach me a few steps.
Right. If I can remember. It's been a couple of years, but yeah.
Oh, just anything. We white girls, we sit out a lot.
We can actually probably go to a dance if you come here on a Saturday night.
Oh, well, calm down.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. There you go. But again, it's one of those things, music, dance, those things that really have the power to cross those boundaries and those divisions.
Yes, yes.
And everything like that. And so, you know, I love it when I see, for example, watching videos of little babies, like 2-year-old babies, and they're all just kind of dancing. To them, it doesn't matter where the music, what genre or what group or what people or what culture, they're just reacting to what they're hearing.
And they connect to their rhythm so soon.
Exactly. But how easy it is to divert them away if they're not exposed to a variety of music. So they kind of get socialized into looking and believing in this one thing rather than looking at life from that more equitable and diverse perspective, because there's so much out there. It's just so much.
So much,
Yeah, so it is time for us to take our mid-episode break, and we will come back and continue our conversation. So welcome back to Inflection Point Podcast and our series of discussions on the Sankofa Leadership Continuum. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Mavis now, and she's going to share a little bit about a gentleman by the name of Gordon Parks. So take it away, Mavis.
Yes, yes. As many of you may know, I'm pretty into photography. I've done some photography myself over the past few years. And I just love what a photograph can do to the viewer. It can teach, it can move emotions, it can document things in time, it can tell a story. So I wanted to do something in the context of generational leadership, but about the visual arts, specifically photography. Photography has been used for a very long time, a couple centuries now, right? To teach and engage future generations, in what's happening socially or politically, economically. An image can represent so much. I wonder if many of you have seen this photograph of a slave who's become an enslaved person who's come to be known as Whipped Peter. The photograph shows his back covered with scars. And it is a photograph that tells so much of his story. And in reading a little bit about it, I found out that this was during his medical check. He had escaped bondage and wanted to join the Union Army. So this was captured when he was going through that med check. And this thing has lived, well over 100 years already. That's one of the sample photographs that really leaves a mark. Another one is, many of you have probably seen photographs of lynchings. There's one in particular where there is a crowd of people standing underneath a Black man who is hung from a tree. And when I look at that picture, I see the Black man, and I can't imagine the pain and the terror that he went through. And Anita and I talked about this just a little bit today, and she mentioned that what she sees in the photograph is the crowd of white people looking up at this Black man. There's even a young girl in the photograph who is smiling. So these kinds of photographs tell a story that, again, documents the time, the society, and the horror of racism, really. So moving on, I just did a little research on Black photographers, and I came upon Gordon Parks. And true confessions, I did not know this man, and he was so multi-talented. And I think when I take my next trip, I'm going to get his books on Audible, so that I can really read his words. But he was born in 1912 in Kansas, no less. And he bought his own first camera for like $12.50. He was one of 15 kids, if you can imagine. And because, you put that camera in the hands of a young Black man like that, and his eyes show up in the photographs that he captures. So he was best remembered for some iconic photos of poor Americans during the 1940s. He was actually hired by the federal government for a project. He did photographic essays for Life magazine. He also did film. He was the director of Shaft. I did know about Shaft. I remember the music, so I did know about that one. And he wrote a semi-autobiography called The Learning Tree. He just poured his life into every kind of medium, really. But photography was really his claim to fame. He, as I said, documented American life with a focus on social justice, race relations, the civil rights movement, and the African-American experience. He was born into poverty and segregation in Fort Scott, Kansas. Then he was, like I say, drawn to photography. He was actually the artist that did the cover for Ralph Ellison, who wrote The Invisible Man. So Gordon Parks' works touches so many other forms of art. His photographs found themselves into so many places. The Invisible Man was a book that described the loneliness, the horror, and the disillusionment of a man who has lost faith in himself and in the world. More poignantly, it's also a stark account of America's racial divisions and an unnamed Black protagonist's awakening to his condition of invisibility in the surrounding cultures of white and Black alike. So it's a fascinating aspect of Gordon Parks that he connected with other artists to produce visual work and written work that captured that time period. Let's see here. The Learning Tree was the semi-autobiography book, talks about how it feels, the subtitle is How It Feels to Be Black in a White Man's World. One of the reviews says this is a promising, oh, I got to tell you first, this particular book has been made into a children's book just in 2015, a picture book. And one of the reviews said, this is a promising vehicle for introducing young children to the power of photography as an agent for social change. So he is going to be, he is continuing to impact generations and will continue by, through these books. It may make children aware of contemporary victims of injustice in need of an advocate with a camera. So this can spread out even further, the photography that these kids who are impacted, the pictures they might take and share with the world. Let's see here. Gordon Parks was also most famous for being the first Black director in Hollywood. Let's see here. He continued to want to take a stand against racism and everything he observed. So with his camera, he kind of found a way and kept working through these environments. He even became a fashion photographer, which is, shows his flexibility. And he started photographing even for Vogue. He kind of introduced, I believe, photographing models in motion versus posed, which is a huge change for that genre. The man had no boundaries, man. He just was creating all over the place. He developed a freelance portrait and fashion photographer sideline. He began to chronicle the city's South Side Black ghetto, and in 1941, an exhibition of those photographs won Parks a photography fellowship with the, I believe, the Farm Security Administration, this government organization that he worked with. And it looks like, if I understand these writings about him, there was a painting called The American Gothic, and he remade the image in a photograph form. And I think he worked with under the training, he was under the training of Roy Stryker. And that won him grants and awards and all this kind of things. He, the photograph that I'm talking about right now sort of looks like the two farmers, the man and the woman that are holding the pitchfork and the and the rake or shovel. This woman is standing in front of the American flag, holding a broom and a mop. And this was taken in Washington, D.C. And I think about all the references we've made to, the work that Black people and enslaved people did to even build our Capitol, the White House, and so on. So I'm already coming up on my time here. I just wanted to quote something kind of cool since you mentioned Spike Lee. Bear with me a second. When Spike Lee said, who's also a director of many films today, he said he cites Parks as an inspiration, stating, "You get inspiration where it comes from. It doesn't have to be because I'm looking at his films. The odds that he got these films made under when there were no Black directors is enough." And I think that says a lot about him. And just a little footnote, the Sesame character Gordon was named after Gordon Parks. So he's impacting kids even through his name. So that's the story of Gordon Parks. I just can't wait to read more about him and see more about him. His photography, I want it to inspire me to get out there with my camera again and away from the cell phone, you know? So any comments, questions?
I actually have a comment kind of related to what you just said in terms of getting away from the cell phones.
Yeah.
My daughter made a very interesting comment recently. And basically what she was saying is that she misses the photo albums. And she said, I have all of these images on my phone. And it's like you take that image within that time period and then you move on. And then you take more images and more images and more images. And all of a sudden she just realized, like, I really miss the idea of having a photo album. You know how when you were little, you had each kid like had their own photo album, and you could, you know, look at the grandparents and the, you know, the parents, what they looked like when they were 5 and all of that. And she was just making that comment of how she misses that, which is the real sort of related to Gordon Parks type of photography.
And what will happen to all that digital data? You know, will we maintain that like a photograph that I have of my great grandparents, you know, still? And also, you know, in the phone, it gets lost. You can't even find what you want.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I have albums that fill up my house until 2008. And then when the iPhone came out, it's just a whole different deal. And, you know, depending on how you use your camera, it affects how you see things too. You know, the cell phone doesn't work the same way. I digress. Yeah, it will be great.
I get your point, because like one of the things, like you were talking about the video somewhere along the line, I don't remember, was the conversation we had this morning. We were
it was this morning.
The video, you know, taking the videos and everything. And one of the things that is so much apparent now is that people are so in tune to taking the video that they're actually missing the real action of what they're taking the video of. You know, so for example, if you're at a concert or something, people are so absorbed by taking the video that you're actually missing the concert itself, because you're not
present.
Yeah, you're not present. Exactly.
You're working with a gadget. And you're one step removed too.
Yeah, so it's just kind of interesting to kind of put some of these things together. That's why I'm glad we did a segment on the arts piece of all of it, because there's so many different directions that we could have gone in, and so many people, Oscar Micheaux as an example, who, you know, films were the answer to Birth of a Nation type films, and all of that, just all of these incredible artists that we have had the pleasure of having over the course of generations, right? Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, all of these people that really impacted us when you go back and think about some of the films that we actually saw them in, right?
Right. And the brain remembers that. The brain is very good visually, I think. You know, when you see a scene versus hear a description of it, it's a different.
Well, especially if you're present in it. You're present and experiencing it. So focus on more using your camera or your phone. You're going to remember that's going to stay with you much more in your mind.
Right.
Exactly. Exactly.
You're activating all your senses.
The both of you know that I am like an old school person. Like within the last year, I literally sat down and watched all the episodes of Twilight Zone, Alfred Hitchcock, and Perry Mason, because those things, number one, I could really relate to them because I grew up watching them. But what I find that's really interesting about myself is that some of the nuances of things that I'm able to pick up now, because I'm a lot older, a little bit more experienced, and I see the world through a slightly different lens than when I was 12 or whatever. And you just start picking apart these things and looking at them in terms of like, what was the social context of this particular story? So, you know, you're starting to pick up on those more nuanced kinds of things, and how do those things relate to how we experience life today?
Right. You know, I just watched Marshall, Thurgood Marshall, the film this weekend, and I am almost certain I saw it before. But after the work that we've been doing the last 2 years, I saw so much more.
Yes.
It's just not entertainment, it's racial history. And it was just fascinating. It was just fascinating. Yeah, and I just felt so, kind of privileged in a way to be able to see it that much more deeply now.
Yes, exactly.
Incredible work.
And that comes with the benefit of age. Number one, maturity. Maybe I'll just say maturity a little bit, but not just maturity in terms of your age, maturity in your thinking.
Yeah, about the
Right.
racial study
exactly.
that I've been doing, and with you guys. Right.
Exactly. So you are a perfect example of how when you do get the truth about particularly from a historical perspective, you're getting the truth. It really does change you on the inside, because now when you look at things, it could be something that you watched 100 times before, but now because you have a different knowledge base that resides within you, a different awareness and all of that, now you're able to pick up on things like what you said earlier about the photograph of the lynching. Now, when you and I engaged in that conversation and you shared that you saw the Black bodies, what I saw was the white people and the heartlessness and the violence and the brutality. That's what I saw. Right. But that's also based on, I was socialized in one way, you were socialized in another way. And then our paths come together, and now we're able to have these conversations where now you can see what I see.
Yeah. What a privilege. What an amazing sort of access to, as you might say, Gail, truth. Truth. I realized I just had a very white education and white experiences after that.
So your perspective will come from that education. And if you add to that education, which is what you've been doing, that perspective shifts and changes, and you can now see that through a different lens.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful thing. It's beautiful. Yeah. So I just really appreciate it.
Yeah, we are starting to wind down in our time. But before we go, I wanted to read these quotes. I have these 2 quotes. And both of these quotes are from Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's affirmative action dissent. The first quote is, "Gulf-sized race-based gaps exist with respect to the health, wealth, and well-being of American citizens. They were created in a distant past, but have indisputably been passed down to the present day through generations." And isn't that exactly what we're talking about? These things that are being passed down from generation to generation to generation. And what she is pointing out is that there have been some good, what we were talking about, Gordon Parks and Frankie Manning. These are good things that were passed down, but at the same time, there were a lot of bad things that were passed down, and those bad things are still very alive today. And how we're dealing with one another, the politics and the health and all of the things that have come to light since 2020 and all of that stuff passed down. It's just passed down from generation to generation and generation, which makes it, when I think about that quote, it just makes me think, like, how can an individual really walk through life and just ignore all of that? To put aside all of that to try to maintain a system that, in my view, is starting to crack. It's starting to get cracks in the system, because more and more of this grassroots movement is pushing things, it's pushing upward. That's what I see, right? So I'm going to read you the second part, and then you can offer some comments. So, with full knowledge of the history of racism and discrimination in this country, one would have to be ignorant or complicit not to see how the recent Supreme Court ruling sets us back, instead of helping us move forward as a nation. Those are very powerful words, wouldn't you say?
Yes. Yes.
Very.
That's the whole point, really. It
Mhm.
sets us back. Yeah.
And we are innately wired to move forward, right? To move towards a higher level of consciousness. And that's not taking us there. It's going to take us in reverse.
Yeah, so
But
you had mentioned, I think when we were on break or something, Mavis, that you had listened to Alfre Woodard. I don't remember which podcast it was on, but there's an audio of Alfre Woodard.
It was on MSNBC, right? NBC.
Yes, you're right.
Trying to think of the
He
guy's
was
name.
literally reading
Yes, the whole thing.
Justice,
yeah.
what am I blanking out on?
Ketanji Brown.
Oh, Ketanji Brown Jackson.
For both.
Yeah.
Just reading her dissent, but not reading it. She was acting her dissent.
Yeah.
Yes,
so
with
she
expression.
Exactly. She brought a lot of power, I thought, a lot of emotion into it and all of that. So yeah, I really enjoyed listening to that.
Yeah, it's just an amazing work, and it's going to go down in history, you know, like a lot of famous speeches in this space. It's going to carry a lot of weight, I think, but
Well, we all have the ability to change that paradigm, right? To
that's the
create a
whole
new
point.
paradigm. And we each have a part in that, you
Mhm.
know, each of us.
Right.
Yeah. So based on those two quotes, this is the question that I'd like to put out to our listeners. We have about 3 minutes to go. The question to our listeners is this: what are you willing to do to participate in creating an equitable future for all? Because in my view, it is possible. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen overnight. It might not happen until Cairo has children, but it is possible. And the only way that it is possible is for us to continue this grassroots movement and all of these strategies that are coming forth and really dealing with the truth of where this nation is grounded, like what we are grounded in, those historical things that have gotten us to where we are today. So this is a fundamental question in striving toward a nation that is free from the bondage of racism and the deception of color blindness. Because when you think about the Supreme Court decision, it's almost as if they're trying to act from this colorblind. We want to make everything colorblind, but you can't do that because you built race and color is built into the very fabric of this country. And so there's no way without strong effort, that is just going, it's not going to just go away and disappear by itself.
Well, we have a look at France and what's been going on there in the last couple of months as an example of that, right? Even they have to start opening their eyes and increasing their own awareness and realizing what's always been there, which is racism.
Well,
Exactly.
yeah. French people appear to be rising up in that regard.
Yes, which is
Yeah,
it
against
has to come from those grassroots
systems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what it is. Black Lives Matter, all of that. That's
That's right.
Yeah.
That's grassroots movement.
Everyone has to look in that mirror within themselves and say, okay, where am I with this? What do I believe? Am I living that belief? Am I living that truth?
Yeah.
What
Where
do
do
I
I
do if I'm
stand?
not? Yeah.
Where do I stand? And I think what we just said, what we just talked about is really indicative of the fact that the work in the way that it's being done now is very different, because it's not just about the protesting or being in the streets. It's really about systematically infusing other thoughts and beliefs and ideas and leadership and all of that, just infusing that into the system. So from so many different perspectives.
Conversations. Yeah. And conversations.
Starts with the conversations. Yeah.
Exactly what we're doing, and so many other platforms.
Right there. Yes.
The conversations are very real. The conversations are very open and set up for people to learn to be able to change from the inside out. Right?
Exactly. We got to go, girl.
We got to go. Yeah. So I want to thank our audience for joining us for this episode of Inflection Point Podcast here on Transformation Talk Radio. We are here every first and third Wednesday of the month at 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll see you at the next episode. Thank you for listening to Inflection Point Podcast, where our mantra is cultivating change from the inside out. The journey towards anti-racism and social change doesn't stop here. Truth, reconciliation, and healing come from ongoing, open, honest, and deliberate conversations. Continue to dive in and deconstruct your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs as we band together to manifest social change. Tune in to Inflection Point Podcast every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on TransformationTalkRadio.com for more conversations about how we can cultivate change from the inside out.